guess we're on. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2016 Annual and Special Meeting of Sherritt International Corporation. My name is Hap Stephen, and I am the Chair of the Board of Directors, and as prescribed by the bylaws, I will act as Chair of this meeting. It's my pleasure to welcome shareholders and others present today, and thank you for your interest in Sherritt. With me today on the podium at my far right is David Pathé, our President and CEO, and Ward Sellers, our General Counsel. I now formally call the meeting to order in accordance with the bylaws of the corporations. Mr. Sellers will act as Secretary of this meeting. We will now proceed with the formal business of the meeting. Following the formal business, management will provide you with an update on your company and will be at your disposal to answer questions. Anyone wishing to make a comment or ask a question relating to the business of the meeting may do so at the appropriate time by approaching the microphones on the floor. Prior to making your comment or asking your question, please wait to be recognized. As a matter of procedure, before anyone takes the floor, I will ask them to either identify themselves as a shareholder or, in the case of a proxy holder, to identify the shareholder on whose behalf they are speaking. Only shareholders or their proxy holders are entitled to take part in and vote at the meeting. Before proceeding further, on behalf of the board, I wish to express thanks to those shareholders who have submitted their proxies in advance. Please note that only shareholders who held shares on March 31, 2016, the record date for their meeting, or their validly appointing proxies, are entitled to vote at the meeting. Representatives of the CST Trust Company, the corporation's registrar and transfer agent, are located outside the room and have detailed records relating to the holdings of shares on March 31, 2016. If any shareholder or proxy holder present has not yet registered his or her attendance with CS Trust Company, please do so now. To make the best use of our time at this meeting, certain employee shareholders have been asked to move and second certain of the items which are called for in the notice of the meeting. With the consent of the meeting, I appoint CST Trust Company, the registrar and transfer agent for the corporation, acting through its representatives, Mr. Greg Ashby and Ms. Sherritt de Vera, to act as scrutineer of the meeting. The scrutineer has reported in its preliminary report on attendance that the aggregate number of shares represented in person or by proxy at this meeting totals 116,526,109 shares, or 39.65% of the issued and outstanding shares of the corporation. A final scrutineer's report on attendance and voting will be filed with the records of this meeting. The matters to be addressed at this meeting have been set out in the notice of the meeting and management information circular, which was mailed to all shareholders. Today, you will be asked to receive the consolidated financial statements of the corporation for the year ended December 31, 2015, appoint the external auditor and authorize the directors to set the external auditor's compensation, consider a non-binding advisory resolution relating to the corporation's approach to executive compensation, or more colloquially, the say-on-pay resolution, elect the directors, consider a special resolution authorizing the continuance of the corporation under the Canada Business Corporations Act, consider an ordinary resolution confirming the adoption of a new bylaw number 1 and the repeal of the existing bylaw number 1 and by bylaw number 2, and transact any other such business that may properly come before the meeting. We will vote on the appointment of auditors at today's meeting by way of show of hands, unless a shareholder requests a poll by ballot. The election of directors will be conducted by way of ballot in accordance with the corporation's majority voting policy for the election of directors. We will also proceed by way of ballot on the say-on-pay resolution, the continuous resolution, and the new bylaw resolution. I will now provide instructions on how to complete the ballots for the say-on-pay resolution, the continuous resolution, and the new bylaw resolution. You were provided with ballots when you registered for attendance, and I will provide instructions on the election of directors when we reach that matter. Shareholders may only vote for or against each motion by marking X in the desired box on the appropriate ballot. Please complete the ballot by printing your name and signing where indicated. If you are a proxy holder, indicate the name of the shareholder for whom you are a proxy. The number of voting shares you or your ballot represents has been completed by CST Trust Company and is stated on your ballot. The ballots will be collected by the scrutineer at the end of each vote. We will then continue with the business of the meeting based on the shares voted by proxy in advance of the meeting and the total number of shares represented in person and by proxy at this meeting. I can report the results of each ballot following the vote. The final results of the ballots, as reported by the scrutineer, will be filed on SEDAR and will be available for viewing under the corporation's profile at www.sedar.com. Mr. Secretary, has proper notice of the meeting been given?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the notice of the meeting was given in accordance with existing bylaw number 1. The notice of meeting and management information circular were mailed to shareholders on April 15, 2016, and I am tabling an affidavit of mailing from CST Trust Company confirming the mailing. I've been advised by the scrutineer that we have a quorum, and I will table the final scrutineer's report on attendance and voting once it is ready.
Thank you. I now declare this meeting to be properly constituted for the transaction of business. I shall now request the Secretary to table the minutes of the last annual meeting of shareholders of the corporation held on May 12, 2015. The minutes of the May 12th meeting are available for review by any shareholder. Unless someone wishes to have them read, may I have a motion that the minutes be taken as read and approved? Thank you, Ms. Wood. May I have a seconder? Thank you, Mr. Ross. We will conduct this vote by a show of hands. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. I declare the motion carried. The next item of business is the presentation of our 2015 audited consolidated financial statements, together with the auditor's report thereon. A copy of the 2015 annual report, which contains the audited consolidated financial statements and the auditor's report for the year ended December 31, 2015, has been mailed to each registered shareholder who requested a copy. There are extra copies of the annual report available in the shareholder registration area located just outside this room. The board has approved these financial statements, and the Secretary will now table the annual report. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the appointment of the auditor for the ensuing year and the determination of the auditor's remuneration. I note for our shareholders that Mr. Richard Clark of Deloitte is present at today's meeting. May I have a motion with respect to the appointment of auditors? Thank you, Mr. Snowden. Oops. Sorry. I'm trying to move it fast. Sorry. It's the excitement that I didn't want to keep you people in too long. May I have a seconder? Thank you, Ms. Ross. If there's no discussion on the matter, I will now call for a vote on the motion, and we will conduct this vote by show of hands. All in favor? Opposed, if any? None, so motion is carried. The next item of business is the consideration of a non-binding advisory resolution, commonly known as the Say on Pay. The effect of this non-binding advisory resolution is to give the shareholders an opportunity to endorse or not endorse the corporation's approach to its pay program and policies for its executives. The full text of this non-binding advisory resolution is on page 3 of the Management Information Circular. In order to be passed, this resolution must be approved by a simple majority of the total votes cast. May I have a motion with respect to the resolution?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the non-binding advisory resolution regarding the corporation's executive pay program and policies, text of which is in the Management Information Circular, be hereby authorized and approved.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. May I have a seconder? Mr. Chairman, I second the motion. Thank you, Mr. Snowden. I note that 65.81% of the votes cast by proxy in advance of this meeting are in favor of this resolution. Given the attendance at today's meeting, these votes by proxy are more than sufficient to pass the resolution. Is there any discussion on the matter? If there is no discussion, I will now call for a vote on the motion. So I would ask you to please fill out your ballot in the manner indicated at the beginning of the meeting. Once you have completed your ballot, please raise your hand and the scrutineer will collect your ballot. Has everyone completed their ballot? Any to collect? None. Okay, that's fast. The polls are now closed, so we would ask the scrutineer to proceed with the tabulation of the ballot results. As I indicated, based on the number of votes cast by proxy in advance of the meeting, that the Say on Pay resolution has been approved by a majority of votes cast by shareholders present in person or by proxy. Following the meeting, the complete results will be reported by the scrutineer, and we will file them on SEDAR. The next item of business is the election of directors. The number of directors to be elected at this meeting has been set by the board at 8. All 8 of management's recommended nominees have been approved by the board of directors and have consented to stand for election to the board. All of management's recommended nominees are currently members of the board. Particulars relating to the 8 nominees recommended by management are set out in the information circular. I would ask each of the nominees who is present to stand when his or her name is announced or the nomination is announced. I now declare the meeting open for nominations.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Chad Ross. I'm a shareholder of the corporation. I have the pleasure of nominating the following 8 persons as directors of the corporation. Hap Stephen, Timothy Baker, Peter Gillen, Sir Richard Lapthorne, Adrian Loader, D. Mark Hugh, Lisa Pankratz, and David Pathé. And move that they be elected directors to hold office until the next annual meeting of shareholders, or until their successors are duly elected or appointed.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. May I have a seconder? Thank you, Ms. Wood. As the corporation's advance notice bylaw requires any shareholder wishing to make nominations for election as directors to give advance notice to the corporation, and no advance notices were received, I declare the nominations closed. As there are 8 spots to be filled on the board and there are only 8 nominees, it is clear that the 8 nominees will be elected. We will nevertheless conduct the vote by way of ballot in accordance with the corporation's majority voting policy. Is there any discussion on this matter? No discussion. I will now call for a vote on the motion. Are there shareholders who have ballots to fill out and be collected? Okay, similar to that, then I don't think there's any need to do that if there's no shareholders with ballots here. Okay, based on the number of votes cast by proxy, I can report that the individuals nominated were all elected to the board. We will file the complete results of the ballot as reported by the scrutineer on SEDAR, and they will be available there. The next item of business is the consideration of a special resolution authorizing the corporation to make an application under the Canada Business Corporations Act. The full text of the resolution is set forth in Schedule B on page B1 of the Management Information Circular. In order to be passed, this resolution must be approved by not less than 2/3 of the votes cast. May I have a motion with respect to the resolution? Thank you, Mr. Snowden. May I have a seconder?
Mr. Chairman, I second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. I note that 94.52% of the votes cast by proxy in advance of this meeting are in favor of this resolution. And given the attendance at today's meeting, these votes by proxy are more than sufficient to pass the resolution. Is there any discussion on this matter? None? Okay. Anybody have ballots that they wish to complete and have collected on this motion? None, so we'll move on. I can now declare that this motion was carried based on the proxies. The next item of business is the consideration of an ordinary resolution confirming new bylaw number 1 and the repeal of existing bylaw number 1 and bylaw number 2. The full text of this ordinary resolution was set forth in Schedule E on page E1 of the Management Information Circular, and the full text of new bylaw 1 is set forth in Schedule F on page F1 of the Management Information Circular. Subsequent to the mailing of the circular, the Board of Directors approved an amendment to new bylaw number 1 to remove Section 3A 7C based on the recommendation of Institutional Shareholder Services, ISS, a proxy advisory firm, which was concerned about the impact this provision would have on shareholder proxy access. A notice alerting shareholders to this amendment was filed on SEDAR on April 29, 2016, and copies of the notice have been made available at the entrance to this room. As set out in the notice, a copy of the amended new bylaw will be appended to the bylaw resolution presented and voted upon at this meeting in place of Schedule F to the Management Information Circular. This amended new bylaw number 1 is identical to Schedule F in all respects except for the removal of the section previously noted. The resolution confirming this new bylaw number 1 and the repeal of existing bylaw number 1 and bylaw number 2 must be approved by a majority of votes. May I have a motion with respect to this resolution? Thank you, Ms. Wood. May I have a seconder? Thank you, Ms. Ross. I note that 93.25% of the votes cast by proxy in advance of this meeting are in favor of this resolution. And given the attendance, that's certainly more than enough to pass the resolution. Are there any ballots on this resolution? None. We will then proceed, and I can declare that motion passed. That concludes the formal agenda items, and I would now call for a motion to terminate the formal portion of the meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the meeting be terminated.
May I have a seconder?
Mr. Chairman, I second the motion.
Okay, all in favor? Opposed? I didn't think anybody wanted to carry on. The formal part of the business of the meeting is now terminated, and before beginning the next part of the meeting, I would now ask the Secretary, Mr. Sellers, to read a statement regarding forward-looking information.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we begin our comments, I'd like to remind everyone that the following discussion will relate to the financial performance and condition of Sherritt International Corporation, and as such may contain forward-looking information about strategies and expected financial results. Various factors, many difficult to predict and to control, could cause actual results to differ materially from forward-looking statements. Forward-looking statements may be made in connection with business objectives and targets, company operations, anticipated financial results, and the outlook for the company, its industry, and the global economy. Accordingly, the audience is cautioned against undue reliance on these remarks. We refer everyone to the cautionary language regarding forward-looking statements set out in our most recently filed annual information form, annual report, and MD&A, as well as the slides at today's meeting, all of which are available at the corporation's website at www.sherritt.com and on SEDAR.
Thank you, Mr. Sellers. I would now like to turn the meeting over to Mr. Pathé, our corporation's president and CEO, who will provide us with an update on the business and affairs of the corporation. Should you have any questions or comments for Mr. Pathé or myself that you wish to bring forward at today's meeting, you will have an opportunity to do so at the conclusion of Mr. Pathé's remarks. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks, Hap, and thank you once again, everybody, for joining us this morning, and welcome to our annual meeting. Before we begin, I actually want to introduce a few people to you. We have our full management team here today, so I'm going to introduce them to you. I'll just ask them to briefly stand up and be recognized as I go through them. You've already met and been introduced to Ward Sellers, our General Counsel. Dean Chambers, our Chief Financial Officer, is here. Steve Wood, our Chief Operating Officer. Tim Dobson, our SVP in Abadavi, who's here today from Madagascar. Elvin Saruk, our SVP of Oil and Gas and Power. Karen Trenton, our SVP of Human Resources. And Martin Vidra, our SVP of Metals. I also want to welcome a couple special guests here today. Here with us is Javier Domocos. He's Cuba's Consul General in Toronto. I believe this is your 4th annual meeting, Javier, and your last, because his term is coming to an end this summer. He'll be returning back to Havana. Also with us here today is Takahiro Azuta and his colleagues from Tokyo. They're one of our partners in the Abadavi project here from Sumitomo Corporation today. I appreciate you coming. Thanks very much. So over the next few minutes, I want to walk you through what our company accomplished in 2015, with an emphasis on our nickel operations and the impact of a depressed commodities market, and then a review of our strategic priorities, including where we focused and what we did last year, what our framework is for this year, and how we're doing year to date. I think next you see a longer version of the forward-looking statement that Ward just read to you, so we'll move on from there. Sherritt's been in the nickel business for nearly 90 years. We currently have operations in Canada, Cuba, and Madagascar. Our nickel business comprises 2 successful nickel operations, the Moa joint venture and the Abadavi joint venture, which together delivered nearly 81,000 tons of finished nickel in 2015. Our Abadavi joint venture is the largest finished lateritic nickel and cobalt facility in the world. Our Moa joint venture has been operating for over 20 years, and we augment our core nickel business in Cuba with our Cuban energy businesses. In 2015, we produced over 18,000 barrels of oil per day and our power generation business contributed steady cash flow. We continue to be Cuba's largest foreign investor. We recognize the value of partnering with government entities and companies that have capital, offtake interests, or local knowledge, and we've done this effectively both in Cuba and in Madagascar. We're an excellent operator. We are recognized globally as the leader in high-pressure acid leaching, due in large part to the expertise and know-how in our technologies division. We're focused on the long term, and we understand how to navigate difficult commodity markets. We have not seen market turmoil in a pricing environment like this in over a decade. We are dedicated to driving down production costs to entrench us amongst the industry's lowest cost producers while preserving cash and liquidity. At this meeting last year, I stood before you and spent some time explaining why Sherritt is the name in nickel. At that meeting, we shared our newly crafted mission statement, which we refer to as our purpose: to be a low-cost nickel producer that creates sustainable prosperity for our investors, employees, and communities. We also shared promises we've made on various matters, including integrity, agility, safety and sustainability, learning and innovation, and shared prosperity. These have guided our actions over the last year and remain core to how we operate your global company. We are now one of the top 10 nickel producers in the world, with roughly 80% of our combined revenue coming from the nickel business. So I want to start today by looking at nickel prices. After falling through much of the latter half of 2014, nickel prices fell again by over 40% in 2015. At our AGM 2 years ago, nickel was trading at nearly $9.50 a pound. In February of this year, we hit a low of $3.50, lower than the nickel prices we saw in the depths of the financial crisis, reaching levels we haven't seen since 2003. In less than 2 years, the nickel prices dropped by nearly 2/3. I want to try and put this kind of price drop in perspective for you. Last year, we talked about the importance of nickel in the construction, aerospace, and automotive industries. In particular, the growth of the hybrid vehicle market has been significant. Tesla's new Model 3 will consume nickel, including nickel used in its battery packs. And Tesla recorded more than 375,000 orders for the Model 3 in its first week. But picture the price of a Model 3 falling from $35,000 to under $13,000. That's the challenge we're having and facing in our pricing environment and the products we produce. 2015 was a difficult year for every resource company, as global economic factors decreased prices across the board. While copper, oil, and gold prices all declined over the calendar year, their downward movement was not as dramatic as nickel's, with its 40% drop. So how has this price deterioration in nickel affected your share price? Here you can see the historical correlation between the price of nickel and the price of Sherritt's common shares. In times of particularly low prices, margins are eroded, or as currently the case for many nickel producers, eliminated entirely. As a significant global nickel producer, our value will always be tied to prevailing nickel prices. This is why we've taken a long-term view, building and operating low-cost, long-life assets to ride out the cycles and concerning ourselves with the elements of our business that we can control. And today, we're potentially starting to see some signs of increased demand for nickel. Quite recently, and for the first time in a long time, we've had to turn customers away because our order book is full. With our ramp up at Mbatavi, we've been able to increase our nickel production by 84% in just 3 years. While Mbatavi was an ambitious undertaking in its scale, complexity, and cost, our efforts represent the most successful HPAL ramp-up ever, getting to 80% of nameplate capacity in just 36 months. And while we've been advancing Mbatavi, we've been able to bring our costs down. Net direct cash cost, or NDCC, declined each quarter at both of our nickel operations. And we expect it to decline further this year. At Mbatavi, there's more work to be done, both by our team on the ground and our technologies team, to improve asset reliability and to ensure every circuit is working within its design parameters. At MOA, we look to bring our acid plant online and continue to introduce greater efficiencies in our mine planning and production. The NDCC at both of our nickel operations is below the 50th percentile when tracked against the world's nickel producers. At today's prices, more than 50% of global nickel production is underwater on a cash margin basis. Our long-term objective is to see both operations drop into the bottom quartile of nickel producers when ranked by NDCC. To realize that, much work remains to be done, but such an objective is completely aligned with our purpose to be a low-cost nickel producer that creates sustainable prosperity for our investors, employees, and communities. While we advance our nickel business and our energy business, we're also ensuring that we have a strong balance sheet and adequate liquidity to weather today's markets. From the approximately $800 million in proceeds we received in 2014 from the sale of our coal business, we paid down $400 million in debt and kept the remainder in cash to bolster our liquidity. Of our total debt of $2.1 billion, only $927 million is recourse to Sherritt. The remaining $1.2 billion relates to capital costs for Mbatavi and is non-recourse to Sherritt. This debt will only be repaid out of future distributions from Mbatavi. However, until that debt is repaid, 70% of those distributions will go towards that repayment of those loans, and the remaining 30% will come directly to us. So this brings me to our 40 for 12 issue. Our ownership stake in Mbatavi is 40%, and consequently we have funded 40% of its capex and operating expenses during a period of historically low nickel prices. Due to this 70-30 sharing mechanism on those non-recourse partner loans and the protracted period of low nickel prices that we have been enduring, it will be a significant period of time before we receive more than 12% of Mbatavi's distributions, being 30% of our 40% share. On this basis, we can no longer justify continuing to contribute to Mbatavi at a 40% rate, and accordingly, in our 2015 year-end financial statements, we announced that we are no longer funding Mbatavi until the 40 for 12 issue can be addressed. As an organization, we are committed to providing a safe and rewarding workplace. I want to recognize a failure in that regard in 2015. We had 4 fatalities in Mbatavi, and I want to repeat that our sympathies go out to the families, the individual's family, friends, and colleagues. In response, we conducted an extensive safety audit across all of our sites and developed new standards and measures. We reviewed, standardized, and in many cases tightened our protocols for various types of inherently dangerous work, including working at heights and working in confined spaces. There's no greater priority than ensuring that every employee goes home safely at the end of each day, and we continue to work hard to ensure this happens. On a more positive note, our Mbatavi operation received prominent awards for sustainability from the United Nations and from Green Cross International, and we won the Canadian Institute of Mining, Metallurgy, and Petroleum's prestigious Syncrude Award for excellence in sustainable development. So as we reposition Sherritt to focus on our core nickel business, we laid out a set of strategic priorities to strengthen the company, entrench us as a low-cost producer, and position us to succeed when the commodities markets turn. This framework has allowed us to improve our businesses regardless of market conditions. I'd like to spend a few minutes then reporting on how we did in 2015, what we intend to do this year, and how we fared year to date. In 2015, we articulated 5 strategic priorities to provide clarity across the organization on what we needed to do. For those of you who were shareholders in 2014, you may recall that the 2015 priorities were an extension of the work we set out the year prior. Despite the difficult market conditions, we delivered against all of our priorities. In our nickel business, our net direct cash cost declined in each quarter, and the construction of the acid plant progressed on budget. Attaining financial completion at Mbatavi in September was our single biggest accomplishment in 2015. At the beginning of the year, there were few that would believe we would have accomplished this. 10 separate certificates covering all manner of operational, environmental, legal, and financial aspects of the operation were completed. As a result, the Mbatavi project financing became non-recourse to Corres, Sumitomo, and us. What this means to Sherritt is that we no longer guarantee the Mbatavi project financing. Annual principal and interest payments, $188 million US for principal alone, are no longer an obligation of our treasury. In 2015, the single biggest draw of cash on Sherritt was Mbatavi, requiring US $106 million. Financial completion made it possible for us to take action on our 40 for 12 issue and to begin the negotiations with our Mbatavi lenders that are now underway. In Cuba, we fulfilled our drilling commitments on the lands covered by our production sharing contract extension and we reprocessed seismic data to identify drilling locations on Block 10. We finished the year with $435 million in cash, and in addition to lowering our operational costs, we reduced our administrative expenses by 21%. For 2016, you can see we condensed our strategic priorities to 3, but really they are consistent with the framework we developed 2 years ago. We'll continue to focus on our core nickel business, including driving down the NDC at both Moa and Mbatavi. We will look to extend our Cuban energy business, including allocating capital to new drilling on Block 10, a highly promising area that we drilled in the 90s from an offshore platform. With improved drilling technology and a new production sharing contract, we are now able to drill from onshore, and we expect to complete our first well this year. We are committed to maintaining a strong balance sheet and reducing costs across our organization. Increasing production, reducing costs, and protecting our balance sheet enables us to ride out current market conditions and positions us to reap the benefits of rebounding commodity prices. So we're about a third of the way through 2016, so let me give you an update on where we are in regards to these 3 priorities. The acid plant continues to be on time and on budget and will commence operations in the 3rd quarter, allowing us to drive significant cost out of our Moa operations. Our production guidance remains on track for the full year, and our key performance indicators show us maintaining our peer-leading performance in environmental, health, safety, and sustainability measures. In Cuba, we've completed the permitting process for drilling on our new block, and we've begun preparations on the ground. We expect to be drilling during the 3rd quarter. In addition, we are building a new pipeline that will provide additional gas supply to our power operations. At the close of the 1st quarter of 2016, we had $370 million in cash after repaying and terminating a $35 million line of credit and making a $10 million repayment on our credit facility. We are working with our partners and lenders in the Mbatavi joint venture to seek deferrals on the Mbatavi project financing and address our 40 for 12 issue. We continue to be the operator of this large and complex facility. Over the last 3 years, we have taken steps to bring greater focus and discipline to Sherritt. At Mbatavi, we improved operational performance and achieved financial completion, a task that many analysts and experts did not think possible. Financial completion and the project debt becoming non-recourse to Sherritt has allowed us more flexibility in how we allocate our capital and the ability to act on our 40 for 12 issue. We have reduced operational administrative expenses across our business. Like you, I'm a shareholder of Sherritt. And while short-term returns have not been what we were expecting or hoping for, in 2015, I personally was a buyer of shares. I believe in the long-term value of Sherritt and its assets, the strategy we have put in place, and the likelihood of improving market fundamentals. While commodity markets have been exceedingly difficult for a prolonged period of time, and we will always be tied to the performance of those markets, it is imperative that we maintain our long-term outlook. With no signs of change in the world's push towards urbanization, the importance of aerospace technologies, and growing requirements for battery storage, nickel will continue to play a critical role in global production and consumption. At the same time, there's been no significant investment in new nickel production since the financial crisis. And given the time needed to bring new projects online, it could take a decade or more to see significant increases in the overall supply. As the owner of an operator of long-life, low-cost assets, Sherritt is well positioned to take advantage when the nickel markets inevitably improve. Before I close, I want to take a moment to thank our employees all across the organization. We're working hard for you in Canada, Cuba, and in Madagascar. 2015 was a difficult year, and our employees responded. Thank you all. Thank you once again, all of you, for coming. At this time, I'm happy to take your questions. As Hap mentioned, there are microphones set up in the hallway. If you could line up there, we'll call upon you. As you step up, please introduce yourself and where you're from, and we'll take any questions that are on your mind. Thank you very much. Questions?
My name is Eid Atiya. I'm a shareholder for practically 20 years. I talked to you before the meeting, and I appreciate what you're saying. But what I can see, you're putting your eggs in one basket, which is the nickel, the gas, and oil. Have you thought about diverting to something else where because all this three product has been depressed, and maybe there are other option for you to be able to flex more, like now things in Cuba have improved. At one time, I understand you are in a tourist attraction, hotel and facilities. Have you sold that business?
Yeah, we did have minority interests in a couple hotels in Cuba. Those interests were sold 6 or 7 years ago now, I'm going to say.
So you're not planning to go back to this business? What I'm trying to see is, I'm a financial consultant and I've been doing a lot of business. I don't put all my eggs in a basket, and I should have some flexibility, one side to another side, to be able to function and get, because I understand at the moment the share price has been depressed and the book value is high, so if things can turn around, maybe there are some hope. But
I think that's right. I appreciate your question on different assets. A few years ago now, we went through a process and we identified our nickel businesses and our businesses in Cuba as areas where we have real differentiating expertise and believe we are the logical operator of those assets. We would always look at new opportunities, but to branch out into new opportunities, we would want to be confident that we have the expertise to be the logical operator of those assets and not simply pursuing financial opportunities that we don't bring anything unique to. That is where we felt we had real competitive advantage and differentiating expertise in these nickel operations that we now operate, and our long history in Cuba differentiates us from others that might be attempting to go into Cuba today. Capital, as you're well aware, has been scarce the last few years, and we've been focused on opportunities in our existing business. We don't have the luxury of retooling our operations to produce nickel one month and gold the next. We are in the nickel business for the long term, and that's where our focus remains on driving down costs and efficiency and being that low-cost producer that can survive throughout the cycle. We do have the advantage of long-life assets that leave plenty of time for returns to be made, but right now it's a difficult market out there.
Thank you. And then I can say at the end, this is the first meeting I came to be personally here, and I'm very pleased, and I should say thank you for your big job and effort from everybody.
Thanks very much. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Other questions from anyone? Sir.
My name is Leslie. I don't think I have to work.
Can everybody hear that up at the back okay?
I'm told I'm too loud anyway. So, Leslie Dovis, I'm a shareholder. I have a short question. Are you telling us to back up the pickup truck now? Buy more shares. Thank you.
What I'm telling you, I think, is it is an incredibly difficult nickel market out there. Commodity companies across the board have had a very tough time of it the last few years. Nickel, frankly, has been harder hit than most. With more than half of the world's nickel production losing money on a cash margin basis, never mind their sustaining capital, never mind their financing and their other overhead costs, I don't think that is a situation that can persist forever. Companies' capacity to lose money is not infinite. Either you have to see supply coming out or prices going up. What I can't predict for you today is when that's going to happen. This market situation has already persisted longer than most would have expected it to. Uncertainty in China is a dramatic factor in the nickel market. Nickel is a smaller market, frankly, than copper and some other metals out there. A couple million tons a year is all it is. Roughly half of that demand, 50% of the demand, 25% of the supply is Chinese-based. And the reality is, in today's market, there is not great transparency as to what's happening on either of those numbers. So market timing is tough at the best of times, and I wouldn't pretend to be able to tell you what the right time is or to call the bottom. There's still a lot of uncertainty out there. I think better days are ahead, but telling you when that is going to be is all but impossible. That's why our focus really hasn't changed from year to year. We're in the nickel business for the next 25 or 30 years. The focus on long life, low cost operations. When you're in the nickel business for the next 30 years, frankly, the nickel price tomorrow is less relevant. That's the way we try and run our business. timing markets is a tough way to make a living.
There's one more thing. I've read it many places, many times, Baron Rothschild said, but the blood is in the street, including your own. That's the time.
Well, if there's not some blood in the street already, we're on the verge of that, with the way we're going at the moment. Any other questions?
Yep. My name is Garnet Salmon. I'm a shareholder here in Toronto. I noticed the recourse versus non-recourse, and I understand the difficulties in the nickel market. But is there any triggers in the or covenants in the non-recourse component? Sorry, the recourse component of the debt that can trigger the non-recourse part, and the risk that might raise to the company itself?
At this point, no. We're confident that the non-recourse debt will remain non-recourse and is repayable solely out of future distributions from Embadavi. And the reality is that if Embadavi never produces sufficient distributions for 70% of our distributions to repay those loans, they will never be repaid.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing further? Sir.
Don Cross, a shareholder. Just out of interest sake, it's my understanding that for several years, because you did business in Cuba, and the U.S. had nothing but sanctions against Cuba, that you were not welcome, let's say, in the United States, and neither were members of your board or et cetera. Since sanctions have been lifted by Obama, does this loosen things up for you? Can you now go to the States, and can you do business stateside? Are they giving you business? Just how is this all coming about?
So we have seen internationally some improvement in the relationship, I guess you could say, between Cuba and the U.S. And quite recently, President Obama traveled to Havana and attended a baseball game and all that sort of stuff. We have seen some relaxing of restrictions on Americans sending money to family in Cuba, restrictions on American tourists traveling to Cuba lifted. However, the big chunks of U.S. policy towards Cuba that affect our business, being the trade embargo of the island itself that prevents U.S.-made goods going to Cuba and Cuban-made goods going to the U.S., and the Helms-Burton legislation, which is the piece of policy that prevents people like me from being able to travel to the U.S., remain intact and unchanged. So I still prohibited, as are a number of my colleagues and some of our directors, from traveling to the U.S. The differentiating factor on that compared to some of the other things that the president has done by himself is the embargo itself and the Helms-Burton legislation are acts of Congress, and it requires the U.S. Congress to act to change them rather than unilateral action by the president. And predicting when that is going to happen, while I do believe that that is the train we're on and that train is likely irreversible, gets tied up in the complexities of the U.S. political system, which seems to get more complicated by the week. I'm not expecting anything to happen, certainly between now and November. And what happens after that, well, I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen after November. But it is subject to the vagaries of the U.S. political system. I think it will come in time, but it is a process that's going to unfold in months and years rather than days or weeks.
Good, thank you.
Well, if there are no further questions, I'll just once again thank you all for joining us here this morning. We'll look forward to seeing you all back here again next year. I will be around for a little while if anybody wants to chat. And again, thank you for coming. See you in 2017.